Hey, everyone. Welcome to another episode of At the Table. Today's a treat because I get to introduce you to a friend that I have gotten to, goodness, serve alongside for decades now. I feel like, it's been a good long while, but she literally is one of my most favorite people to lead and serve alongside. Welcome to the show, Amanda Chapman.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
I know we're states away, but it's always like a giant catch up time whenever we're finally able to like be on the same screen in the same room and just talking all things church, ministry,
Right.
life, parenting, motherhood, all of it. So I'm really
Totally.
pumped to have you on the show and to introduce you to our listeners today.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to be here. I think that, like you said, every time we've gotten into ministry, it's like the quickest connection, and we always just have an amazing time. So I love it.
Absolutely. Definitely a kindred heart. So, today
Yes.
on the show, we have been talking through women in the church and we're kind of looking at different roles. And so, you were honestly the first one that I thought of to really kind of bring out the beauty, the hardship, the uniqueness of being a woman in leadership and in worship ministry and music. And so, I'm really excited to not only unpack your story, but then maybe even kind of step on some toes and kind of hit a little of a hot topic that is within the church. But why don't we kind of start at the beginning? Tell us a little bit about you. Tell us about your family, where you're recording from, how you serve, all the fun things.
Well, I am Texan born and raised, which is how we first got to meet. So that was kind of fun. Um, and I love everything Texas, the typical Tex-Mex and all of the things, all the cheese and all that. I'm a worship leader and songwriter. I've been doing worship ministry for probably 25 or more years in different capacities and lay leadership and on staff. I am married for 22 years to an Australian, and I have five kids who range from 13 to 21. And my oldest is married. So that's kind of crazy. But yeah.
So you're busy. Like you've got a lot going on for sure. But at the
Yes.
same time, it's been really fun. We're similar in age, similar in, I think, just kind of navigating this whole leadership role that God has allowed us
Mhm.
to kind of step into, church roles, all of those things. Okay, so let's kind of start at the beginning because you said you're a songwriter, you lead in worship. And so let's kind of talk about how did that get started in your life? So have you always had a love for music? And when I look at you, you're so talented, like skill level to where you're
Mhm.
able to not only write, but play various instruments, those kind of things. So how did that love really kind of spark in your own life and story?
I, from a really young age, like five, have been writing songs. So, I mean, my dad still has like the little cassette tape that he recorded me recording with one of those like, keyboards I got for Christmas that you could like hit the button and it'd be like, but up, da, 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 and then I'd like write these little songs about not wanting to go to bed. And we sound like chipmunks. I'd get my siblings to be like doo-woppers. I was always like arranging, I was like the director. Um, and I've just always loved music for forever. And I come from a musical family. And so that was always there. And then I always had this natural bent and tenderness toward the Lord and things spiritual. So, like, those were just like always ingrained in me. Totally, gifts I feel like that were given to me. And then I would say through the years, those passions just through my testimony, which is a huge part of my whole life. Like, I feel humbled. I was thinking about this, like you asking me on the show, because I have no formal training. Like, I have no college degree. Here I am, this girl who, part of my testimony, I'll just be totally honest, was I got pregnant before I was married at 17 years old. And I thought that disqualified me from ministry. So I kind of like checked that box off. Okay, I guess that's not what I'm going to get to do. And I just served as a wife and as a mom for years. And the Lord just through this beautiful providence and sovereignty and out of like nothing, I was like serving in the church and loving what I was doing and writing songs and being a mom, and then I ended up on staff, and it's like totally didn't. I anticipate it, didn't feel like I was ready or I don't know, like I said, equipped or and the Lord just totally shifted my mind on what I was called to. And I've been so clearly called to what I'm doing now and blown away and humbled. And all I can say, it's totally Him. So, yeah, that's kind of the uh, 20 years of my testimony and my calling as quickly summarized as I can. But yeah.
Yeah, well, and I think you're hitting on something. Like we may not have pregnancy before we were married kind of in our story, but I think when I look at my own story, when I talk to other leaders, like there's so many things that we can think disqualify us, or I
Yeah.
don't have, and especially for women, like I haven't been to
Hmm.
school for this, or I haven't had the formal training, or this is in my past, and so there's no way that God could use me in this way. And so what I love about unpacking women's stories is just that God uses broken people, normal people, and people that
Right.
him in order to be able to show out his glory. And I think
Right.
one of the things from the very beginning, from the first time that I got to lead at a conference with you, was that humility and that willingness just to kind of show up broken. And I think
Mm.
that's a big distinction in you and how you lead
Oh,
others to Jesus. And so,
yeah.
very much
Thank
a
you.
recipient, I think, of just what God has done in your life and how he has journeyed with you, and your vulnerability
Mhm.
in being able to show the hard and to show that I don't feel worthy of being here. And we're actually going to talk about that here in a little
I
bit. So,
know. Yeah. Yeah.
okay, so kind of bring us up to speed. Like, tell me, how are you serving today? Like, tell me about your church, your role, your title, all of those things, because I think that will kind of feed into a little bit more of our conversation too.
Yeah. So I am the worship director. So the actual head of our worship ministry at a church in Arlington. It's a smallerish church. Well, I mean, I don't even know. Numbers are kind of all over the place, but 200, 300-ish people. And I've been here. That's kind of a crazy story. It's been a little bit of a homecoming. I've been back here for 2 years. I just hit my 2-year anniversary. And then I've served at a couple different churches as the worship minister, worship director. I was an associate at one point. Being a mom, I felt like full time was a little hard, so I kind of took some steps back. But I've been at this church since 2004 in one manner or another, so not necessarily on staff, but yeah. So I am the worship director. I have rotation of band members underneath me. I do play keyboard some, but I typically just lead worship most Sundays and plan all of the worship. I have a choir and stuff like that. So yeah, that's my role right now.
Love it. Okay, so let's kind of get into the nitty gritty of like a Sunday morning and how you are
Mhm.
leading and really kind of even coaching some of those choir members, your band members. Like you've got a group of people that you're getting to shepherd and develop and lead out. So, kind of walk us through, what does it look like picking songs for a Sunday morning? And what does it look like to kind of be able to really put together that Sunday morning experience or that Sunday morning time together as a church family? I mean, there's a lot of different parts that you're having to kind of maneuver and navigate and plan for. So, kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and show us, what does it look like back there?
Ooh, actually, I'm a little bit of an OCD organizational nerd. And it's a little rare with worship, or I should say, like creative people, right? So I have this weird dichotomy of like creative and like let's write songs and like live in this world of like, freedom and then I'm like, okay, I need to spreadsheet this out. So one of my favorite things to do actually is the planning side. I take what my pastors are going to be preaching on and I look at the next month. I usually plan a month at a time. And I have the passage that they're preaching from. And then I just go before the Lord. And somebody said one time, loved this. A lot of people in worship think that to be spirit led, it's like in the moment. Oh, like I'm just going to sing this because I feel like the Spirit's leading me. That can happen. And I do that a lot. But the Spirit is in the planning too. He can be a part of that in an intimate way where I think I don't want to just blanket say that a lot of worship leaders do this, but I think a lot of times songs are just chosen because they like them, because people are requesting them, because whatever, XYZ. And I'm like so purposeful that I'm like, no, like, what are we learning about this coming Sunday? How can I best set the table for my church to digest this subject? And how can I give them an anthem or even anthems that they're going home singing? Because they're going home singing our songs, right?
Mhm.
And I want them to connect that to what they just heard from the sermon. So, yeah, I'm just really intentional. I read the passage, I look through, we have something called Planning Center that I, keyword search songs, and I try to figure out how can I best, yeah, partner those and really make it a whole Sunday morning experience. And so many people have said, in ways that they probably don't even realize until they go home and they chew on a song. They're like, oh my gosh, this was that thing that the pastor was saying. And then now this is like this song, and I have this like tool now in my toolkit, and I can, yeah. So I'm pretty OCD now. We'll make changes and stuff like that as we go, and all of that. But a lot of times, I'm taking that at the biggest, the 30,000 foot. That's like my first step. But then I'm also mindful of like, I like to think of a set as sort of like meat and potatoes. So, our church is a Bible church. And so we have a whole spectrum of people who've come from different denominations, from more liturgical to more charismatic. And I actually come from a kind of charismatic background, but have kind of swung the pendulum a little bit. But the song choices and kind of the whole morning is like a whole table, like the meat and the potatoes. So I always want to make sure I've got a song that's really, really gospel centric. And maybe it's a King of Kings or Living Hope or In Christ Alone. And then maybe I'll have like a potatoes, like, Great Are You, Lord, and songs that are a little bit simpler and repetitive, and, that people are going to engage in a different way. And I kind of look at it as the whole experience, because, not one song is going to necessarily encapsulate the whole gospel, but how I can piece them together to have a whole experience.
I love that. And I love that you put it to meat and potatoes. Like, I'm wondering how writers of those songs are like, wait, it's a potato song. I thought it was a meat song, like,
Yeah. Yeah. And
intentionality that I think you're showing in, it's not just picking your favorites. It's not just picking something that maybe everybody likes, but it really is trying to mesh together not only that time in song, but then also what they're going to be learning from the text. So can you maybe even kind of talk to, I think, the importance of, because I don't know, I think there's been church members or maybe even church services that I have had conversations with or I have been a part of, to where it's just like, okay, this is the singing time, and then everybody sits and now you listen to the preacher and then you leave. So kind of talk more about, I think, as the leader, as the one that's kind of really trying to like play this thing out. And I know you're working with your pastors really closely, but like the goal isn't just to come and consume, like you're wanting to. So let's kind of talk through what that shift looks like and how you get more participation from your church members instead of it becoming kind of a spectacle or an entertainment concert kind of feel.
Yes. Oh, this is a huge passion of mine. I have never felt, I hate being I'm not a performer. I don't like that word. Some people will even say that, oh, great job. Oh, you have such an amazing voice. I just love, and I walk away from those comments like, I'll be gracious and or thankful, but I feel like I haven't done my job if like that's the comment they're making. But if at the end of a service they've said to me, oh, the way that the Lord ministered to me in that song, or that moment, I just sensed the presence of the Lord, or the truth in that one song, I didn't realize, something we actually do at our church too that we just started this year is I go through slide by slide and add scripture to every single song lyric underneath. Yeah. And so they're chewing on these now, and this has been kind of a new thing, and they're like, oh, that I didn't realize that song lyric came from that scripture, because I, as the worship leader, I'm up there, I've had a chance to practice and think through these songs. I know these songs way better than somebody just walking in on a Sunday morning. So I need to think of how can I help facilitate, and for them to see and not miss. This is what we're singing about. This is who our God is. This is what our God has done. This is who you were created to be through Christ Jesus. Like, these are truth. And I also have to understand that they're coming again from a place of, they've maybe just had a horrible kid morning, like they drug their kids out the door, or they've just gone through a hard loss and they're not even wanting to be there. Or, I'm thinking about all the backgrounds. There are people in our rooms that aren't believers. Okay, how can I share the gospel through facilitating? And oftentimes, the way that the set goes, I'll think ahead and kind of have an idea. But I'm not, and I've tried to tell this to our people too, I'm not a song leader. We're worship leaders. And so like, I'm not going to give you a solo. You are going to facilitate a moment. And so like, I'll think about a lyric from a song, and I'll maybe speak in that moment, like during an instrumental, and I'll bring it down. And I'm trying to call people's mind to this awareness of like, don't just sing these words. Don't just sing them because you see them on the screen. Think about this. Like, this is not a passive exercise. This is us engaging our whole selves, our minds because we're thinking about theology, and our bodies because we're singing and we're expressing ourselves, and to not be afraid about that too. Cause I come from more charismatic background and, I'm not going to judge somebody's heart by the way they look, but like, I just want this freedom of like, this is you and the Lord. And so I'm just, another analogy I've often thought about is like coaching. So I come from sports background. I was a gymnast, and I loved the idea of coaches who were like encouraging, like, I'm coaching our people. How, how can I help them to sing louder? Like, my job is to get them to sing, not to listen and just spectate. I mean, those are moments that we do add into our services. Maybe it's like a reflection before communion or something like that. But for the most part, my job is to get them to sing. So yeah, I do everything I can. Can you tell? Like, I get really excited about this.
Love it. Well, and I love how you're even modeling. And I keep thinking back to the beginning, and I know we've talked about this, even just within our own walks and leadership journeys. But what I find so striking about you is that there is passion, and even that feeling that I think you initially started with of I'm disqualified, I don't have the training, but you can tell just in the way that you talk about it and the way that you're talking about how you plan things out. Like, there is so much intentionality. There is so much purpose in how you have learned theology, how you have learned and walked with God, and that being a reflection of your own walk and your own personal experience with Him that then flows out in your leadership. And so I'm just grinning ear to ear because it really is so much of who you are. And I think it's such a good model for so many of us, whether we're leading in worship or we're teaching a Bible study or we're leading our children. Like, there's got to be passion and purpose and intentionality in everything that we're doing as we lead people, or it is just going to be a spectacle, or it is just going to be kind of like a fan base of, okay, this is what is next. So I think that kind of leads me to maybe a little bit deeper and kind of harder questions because, much like my role, like whenever I go and teach at conferences or a pastor that's having to stand up and teach every week, these are kind of considered like platform. And I hate using that. I'm using air quotes because it even is
I know.
saying it. But I think that's kind of what they are known for. Like, we are the ones that are out front. We're the ones with the personality. So let's talk a little bit about just some of the hard things that I think come with that position in leadership, especially around music. And maybe it's just my Baptist background, but there's there's some fighting that can go along with song choice or how church services are scheduled out and those kind of things. So being the person that's kind of upfront, how do you deal with criticism, opinions, people telling you, that's not holy and good because it becomes a spiritual thing in your own life? Like, talk to me a little bit about how you maybe even handle that, navigate that. Like, has it happened to you or is it just me?
Oh yeah, no, I'm like always, people are just like so excited and happy and never complain. Um, this is a hard one for me that I'm still learning. And, I don't think we'll ever get to be like, oh yeah, I'm like totally over. I don't care what people think. My natural bent is people pleasing. That is, and yeah. And I also am very sensitive. And I think that kind of the sensitive part has made me a good worship leader. But it's hard, you pour your guts. Like, if I were just halfway doing it and somebody complained, I'd be like, I didn't really try that hard. But like, your whole life is this thing, right? Your family is sacrificing your husband, and you're doing it outside the boundaries of a normal 9 to 5. People are texting you in the afternoon and they're sending emails of things that they probably should have said to your face, but that was easier. And you're just like constant, right? And I would say, whenever you first asked this question about the platform, you would think that maybe a person's tendency would be like, oh, well, maybe they're going to sin by erring on pride. And like, that's going to be their idol of like being on stage. For me, it's more of like, mine is like fear of man and like affirmation more than attention. Like, I don't really care about getting attention. I'm not that person, but like, it's almost like, am I doing a good job? Like, I'm pouring my guts out here but all I'm hearing is this negative stuff. And not all I'm hearing. I also think that's hard. It's part of it is we tend to focus on like the one person who complained when like the Lord's doing this whole thing with like everything else. But yes. So early on, whenever I took the role here at my church in 2012, I navigated a merge. We had a traditional service and we had a contemporary service. And I was the blender of those services. And that was rough because you don't make anybody happy in a sense, because the people who were in the traditional service feel like, what are all these modern songs, and why aren't we getting our quota of like, we should be having 50% if that's this blend, you know? And then the newer people are, I will say, a lot of those people tend to be okay with the hymns. But like it's just kind of this weird thing to navigate. And yeah, I had to really learn to not take it personally. And I remember the Lord really showing me something that I've had to like preach to myself, which is, and I even like wrote this down so I'd remember it, but that if I'm seeking to please man, I'm always going to be unhappy because man's going to be unhappy, or maybe they're going to be happy and then I'm going to get, you know, prideful. But if I'm always seeking to please the Lord and man is unhappy, I can walk away knowing I've done my job. You know, I do want to learn from things. So if that feedback that I'm getting from the people, I still want to filter it and be like, is there something that I could improve? Again, I do want to remain in a place of humility. Have I been focusing too much on this kind of song or this kind of theology or whatever? Like, has it been too loud? That's one of our complaints, you know, it's too loud or it's too whatever. And are there things I can do to help those people? Not like seeking to like people please them, but like I do want the good of my people. And so like I'm not out to like harm their ears. Like that wasn't my goal, but do I want the room to be full? Yes. So, you know, and sometimes having to let those things go, sometimes having to have hard conversations with people. Sometimes it's been people on my team. And in such an upfront ministry, a lot of us creatives, I'm putting myself in this too, identity gets so wrapped into our gifts. And we forget that we're first, you know, daughters of the Most High King. And we are thinking like, oh, well, she hasn't given me a lead in a while. And so she must be like, I've had people like, you know, do this and they get all funny. And I'm like, again, I have to keep reminding and championing that we are worship leaders. We're not song leaders. And I'm trying my best to facilitate this space. And here's why, you know, so, and I've had to ask people to step down for sin reasons, for pride reasons. And oh my gosh, all of it has been excruciatingly hard. Like that's probably been the most refining leadership, is the people. Gosh, don't they always say ministry would be easier if it wasn't for the people? So yeah, I am still in process, but just remembering who I am serving first and foremost. And when those hard things come, I have people in place too, safe people. What's amazing is where I'm at right now, my leadership is extremely encouraging. And when we hear these kinds of things, when he gets emails sometimes and he's like, let's talk it out, you know, kind of like, let's think through, are there any things we can do? If not, okay, well, I'm going to go to bat for you. And I think that's been really helpful too. Knowing that I'm not out there all alone trying to, you know, and I would say the other thing too is being in community with these people and not withdrawing from it, because then you have like relational equity and they trust your heart when you don't make the decision that they wish you had made. They're not going to just rage quit and leave the church because, you know, they will hopefully come to me and be like, hey, this has been on my heart, and that I'm hopefully an open door that they can come and share those kinds of things with. But definitely a hard part of ministry.
There's so many things that you're saying. And I'm like, yeah, I'm still learning that. And yes, fear of man all over the place. Like, I think it's hard. It's really hard. And so I love your transparency. I think just in even speaking to some of the specific things, even the volume in the room, like we specifically have been trying to figure this out, even within our own church lately. And so there is just this heart to want to shepherd the whole, to want to lead the whole, and still have the capacity, the intentionality, the care for the individual, and to hear and see where they at. And I think you said something in there with any form of criticism, whether it's in worship leading or Bible teaching, or you're just leading a group of any kind. I think being willing to have the maturity and the self-awareness to say, okay, what is this saying about me? What do I need to learn from this? Even if it's coming not in the best fashion or in the best form or words or tone. There's still something here that I need to sit with to be able to let the Lord kind of wrestle out and grow me so that whenever I do respond, it is going to be something that is well versed in leadership in the spirit and not a reaction to them coming at me. And I think that is a lesson, especially these last few years, to where everybody has even more of an opinion on every little thing, And so I think that nugget alone for all of us is a really great truth. So I appreciate you sharing that so much. So, okay. And we talked a little bit about this before we hit record. But here's where I want to go and kind of like end the episode with, because, your position or the place that God is allowing you to lead, no matter denomination, no matter church, like there's a whole range of where you've got people in churches that think, okay, a woman worship minister or worship leader is not okay, all the way to give her the microphone, let her go at it, like it's totally fine. So we're going to go ahead and kind of like just place that spectrum down on the table. So wherever you fall in that spectrum, I think we can all at least come to this episode and say, women are gifted, women have talents, women have passions, and they are used to equip the church. They are for the church and they are for God's glory ultimately. So I think one of the things that you and I have talked about ad nauseum is just the I don't know. I think some of the dynamic of being a woman on staff, I think some of the dynamic of being a woman leader, and you are leading your brothers in your church. So whether that's maybe somebody that is just a member of your church, it's a layperson that thinks that you shouldn't be leading them because you're a woman, or maybe it's the dynamic of your pastor and you are having to work a little bit more closely together because there are those weekly rhythms for those Sunday services. So let's kind of talk about, and I know you're going to be brave here a little bit and really kind of call out, I think, some of just the hard parts of your ministry, as well as where you have seen God really heal and work and move. But where have you maybe as a worship leader really kind of felt this sting or that tension or even that temptation to shrink back because you're a woman in your gifts? And it's become more of a struggle of gender than it really is of being able to kind of like, this is what God has called me to do. This is the place that he's given me to kind of operate. So what does that make you think of? I'm going to kind of let you take it from there and then we'll go back and forth. But I know there's a lot of ways that this conversation can kind of go and end.
I know there is a lot. I have so much and I have lived so much. I'll back up and say a little bit of context. So this was never my plan. I guess I kind of said that earlier. And I was always happy to just serve on my worship team and be like the sidekick. So my brother's a worship leader too. And I was like his sidekick for a while. And I loved that. It was comfy. I didn't have to do all of the facilitating. I felt like didn't have to worry about the theology of it and if it was okay biblically or whatever. I didn't even know how I felt about it, honestly. And so I never saw myself as the head person. And then he left our church and I was the interim. So I still at that point wasn't even sure that I wanted it. And I remember my first time leading, they actually kind of warmed me up by doing a Wednesday night. I was paralyzed by fear, completely paralyzed, and didn't want to talk at all. Focused on the music, and it felt like it all bombed. The band fell apart. And I remember going off stage and just crying and being like, I'm not called to this. This is not for me. And having a pastor kind of pull me aside and be like, listen, this is your first time. You just need some reps. It's okay. And he kind of like coached me through it. And still not being sure, like, Lord, what are you doing in this? And then in my personal life, just through all of the years of like having all of my kids and the humbling that I think the Lord was doing in me, I really clearly felt he was reshaping my thoughts on it. And I almost specifically, I don't like to say God told me, but one of the themes from that season was I felt like he was telling me to get out of his way, and that I was putting myself in a box as a woman because of my gender. Like I was shutting that door real quick and not even just entertaining. And so it was kind of like, take yourself out of this box. Let me lead you where you're supposed to be. And I just went from there, and he grew me, and like everything that I've been able to do was just him. So because of that, and because I kept seeing this calling confirmed and confirmed and confirmed, I almost feel like in some ways when I stepped down and tried to be an associate again, I was wanting to hide a little bit behind a guy, and he just kept bringing me back to the front. And so like I do have a deep conviction about my calling, that I am supposed to be doing what I'm doing. And so when there have been people who have left our church because of me being a woman, or left the churches that I led out before because of me being a woman, um, it was hard because I'm like, how can we both believe the same thing? And I have this deep conviction that I have seen the Lord move me into this position. And, I've had to let that go. But yeah, oh my gosh, it's been such a journey. And that was kind of the start. So just to even say, like, it was me getting myself out of that box. So I kind of understand that some people maybe either have that on themselves, or maybe their perception of, should a woman be in this position. But yeah, it's my deep conviction that what I'm doing is where God has me. So that's the first part of it. And then, gosh, I feel like I could rant, or we could go back and forth, but where I have seen the sting is, more often than not, people under me, men under me. So I lead a very male dominant ministry. At least in the circles that I've been in, a lot of our bands have been men. And I have had to deal with that. And I have had to have hard conversations and ask somebody to step down because of it. Just like subversive stuff, like yucky stuff, like passive aggressive stuff that was coming out. Like we would be in the middle of a rehearsal, and I would be calling out a direction, and they would undermine. And I remember a somewhat recent time that this has happened. I really thought that's what it was. I also, one of my spiritual gifts is discernment, and went to my leadership about it, which, by the way, they are amazing. And we kind of took it further, and we were like, is this what's happening? And he vehemently denied it, but then left the church over the fact that I'm a woman. So, and this was it. So yeah, it has been, it's been hard to not take that personally, and to be like, Lord, I know you've called me to this. And so I just have to kind of go back to that. But it's happened in leadership above me too. Like one time I was told, worship's already feminine enough. And there's like this spectrum of like, oh yeah. And so, yeah. So, which I'm like, don't even, like, worship's not even a song. Like, don't even, anyway, I could get on a whole soapbox about that. But, so like, and then there's a spectrum of how feminine women are. And he told me, you're like on the really super feminine side. So I just don't see, yeah. So I was sized up by, I don't know, because I wear makeup and I like to look cute. Or maybe I sing a little girlier. I don't know.
What does that even mean? Like, oh gosh.
I don't know. But what's funny is he ended up going back on it, and I changed his mind, and I ended up being hired in that position. It was just one of those, it was a kind of a funny thing. But yeah, gender has definitely been an interesting piece of my journey.
Yeah. Well, and goodness, if you're a woman in leadership, I'm sure everybody listening has some kind of, like interaction like that, to where you are reduced down to the gender that God has given you, and not seen it in a way to where we get to image him together, but it's more seen as a limiting or box, or something that they get to kind of speak over and into. So I think, and I'm specifically thinking about even a conversation that I just had with a young woman, and she is serving on staff. And I think because there's so much conversation around women in leadership right now across denominations, but to where she's in a spot now to where the church is kind of shifting and kind of taking on some theological thought on that she is not allowed to lead now unless a guy is present, like going a little bit more hard on what she was allowed to do versus like some of those changes. So I think how I would love to kind of end this for her, and I think even for maybe some of the circumstances that you just kind of mentioned that we're also navigating in our own areas. So what does it look like? Let's end here. What does it look like to, because I think you do this well, you honor and love and respect and work under the authority of your pastors. But at the same time, you still know when to advocate and stand up and say, this is the position that God has called me to be in. And this is what, under their authority and alongside them, it's not even like a hierarchy, that they have empowered you to be able to lead in this area. So I think let's answer the question, what does it look like to not only come under those that God has given us as leaders, but then as well, how do we advocate for ourselves and really stand confidently, not arrogantly, in who God has called us to be to kind of keep moving forward? And I'm kind of thinking, there's been times to where I've been in similar situations, or a boss, or even a man in our church, and it's been the long game, and I've had to kind of show them, like, listen, I'm not here, to show you I'm bigger than you. I'm here to work alongside you. So sometimes I think that answer is the long game. Sometimes it's standing up and saying, yeah, you need to have a heart check. So I think, how would you coach maybe somebody younger or somebody kind of in the same situation on still being respectful to the areas and authority that we have, as well as being confident in who God has made us to be and moving forward in growth?
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. I immediately am thinking of kind of a shift that I've even just had in the last couple of years for myself. Um, I think it is going to depend on your denomination and the church that you're in as to what that's going to look like. The last church that I came from, I would say, was a little bit more hierarchy. And I think that I was and I was fine under it. I didn't feel, I still felt like they gave me authority in my role and all of that. And even I was telling you this before we started recording it, there was some internal wrestling on the idea of women in leadership, and the elders even did a whole research on it. And I was at the end affirmed and told that I could be in my position and everything. But coming out of that and then into this church that I'm at, we were in the beginnings of just that relationship. I have a weekly meeting with my pastor, each of my pastors. I have an associate pastor and a lead pastor, and they both preach. And we talk about life, and we talk about, each what the week's going to look like and all those kinds of things. But I remember saying, I just really want to execute your vision. Like, so how can I do that? I'm asking questions. I really want to execute the vision. And he looked at me, he stopped me, and he said, Amanda, you're not just here to execute my vision. You have a seat at the table. Like, you have a voice to speak into this vision. Like, that's where you are. And I was like, I remember being like, whoa, like I just got elevated in a way that I didn't actually ask for it. So that was the Lord. So I don't know that I have like an advice as to, that was just an amazing, like, I don't know. I don't know if that's just something the Lord's done in his own heart, or if his view on women or whatever, but we have had, I've heard you say it a lot, like, why can't we just work as brothers and sisters in Christ without all the weird, even like the sexual tension stuff, or like the, yeah, guy, girl, whatever. And I've found that here in the last couple of years. And so I don't know if you should just like ask him. I should have gotten his take on that, because I feel like some of it needs to come from them. They need to be willing to give us a seat at the table. And so when you find that, to be able to, like you said, run in those bounds, like one of the things that has been said on the negative was, well, she shouldn't be able to speak between songs because that's too close to preaching. And I have said, first of all, I'm not after your job. I want y'all to know I am not trying to preach but if I'm being told, and I had this deep conviction, if I am being told that I'm no longer able to speak, I have to resign. That is not I'm not standing up and singing. And where are we drawing the line? I'm singing.
Yeah, I know.
So,
I'm thinking even theologically. So if you have like a rhythm to your words, then it's not
yeah,
sin.
as long as I'm singing what I'm saying, and then I remember even one of our elders asking the question, well, should we vet everything that she says? And I went to my pastor and I said, I love it here. I plan on staying here. But if that becomes a standard for me as a woman, and we have a young youth pastor, we have a new youth pastor now, and I think he was youth director, but he's 20, 6, and they've allowed him to preach. And it's kind of a similar thing in that he's not a woman, but they have kind of given him like training wheels, like you're gonna have to like stay in this thing with us, and he's like under there, whatever. But I'm like, if you're gonna let him and you're not vetting what he's saying, like, why are you vetting what, like, we should be either vetting what everybody's saying because that's our standard, or not nothing. But I'm not going to give you my script of what I'm going to say on a Sunday morning. And I wasn't saying it arrogantly, but I was saying it very clearly. I need you to know this. This is not my calling. I'm not going to stand up there and sing. And I also don't feel like I need to be vetted because I am trying my hardest. Like you said, even though I don't have the degree, I have read the word and studied it for years and years and years and longed to. And I've tried to be underneath the teaching of my pastors. And I've always said, if I say anything heretical or theologically weird, even the scriptures that I'm putting up there, I am so careful that I'm not just cherry picking. And so I'm like, but y'all tell me if something's off, if I ever go off, like, stop me. And so staying humble in that side of things, but then also just being deeply convicted that I, as part of my role, as part of my job, am meant to facilitate moments. And if that can't look the way that I feel like it needs to, like in that capacity, I cannot stay here. So I don't know if that's the best advice, like of trying to work with, you know, where you are, and they may have these rigid structures. This girl that you're talking about, you know, maybe for whatever season, like the Lord's gonna, and she's going to still feel called to be in that position. And it's going to look like washing feet and serving and being like, okay, Lord, you know, there was a season where I was having some church stuff in the leadership, and he kept bringing me back to that passage. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, and at the right time, he will exalt you. And I remember weeping one morning and just saying, Lord, I don't even need to be exalted. Can I just be out from under this oppressive leadership? And I felt the Holy Spirit say it again to me. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, and at the right time, you'll be exalted. And I was like, okay, I need to look this up, because what does that mean? And I looked up that word exalted. And in that passage, it just means like restored value, like that you'll be raised back up. And I'm like, and I've seen that happen where I am now. So like you said, something about the long game. Sometimes it is the long game. And I haven't always had that perfect leadership, or that the advocates, you know, and the champions that I have now. And so it's, my response has looked different in those seasons, and it's been humility and a little bit more of a servant, quietness. But I feel safe where I am now. And I do feel like I can say those things, and that we can work as a team, and I can push back, and in a way that, I don't know if you've ever come across this with all of your girls talking to girls, but I feel like when girls are mean, they're called the B word, but when boys are mean, they're just like leading, you know? So we have this fine line of like, I'm not trying to be the B word right here, but I am going to put my foot down here, you know? Anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and there's like Harvard studies on that and everything, that on just the difference in the same quality types and the same personality types, and how even within the genders, it's viewed differently. And so I think what encourages me is, and maybe it's just because I've had eyes just on what the Lord has done with you over decades of ministry. But I think it's true for me. I think it's true for others that I've seen kind of walk alongside, that God is using each season that you're in, each form of leadership and team that you serve on and position that you serve in, titled or not titled, I think to really not only formulate passions and giftings and like weaving those together in such a beautiful tapestry that come together the only way that he can do. But I think even more than that, he is intertwining just so much of his goodness and trust and faith and dependence on him. And I think we both have kind of walked that journey. And that I think is what makes good leaders. That is what makes good ministers and shepherds and, you know, all of those things. And so if you're listening today, and there's so much, I think, Amanda, that you really just kind of hit on, and that you said that it's like, oh yeah, I've been there. She's going there. She's saying that. Which we did on purpose. But if you kind of like felt that prick, or even just kind of maybe some of that holy injustice or that frustration because you've been in those situations, I think both of us would say trust God even in those seasons and lean into him and humble yourself and see what he is showing you and what he's birthing out of that frustration, of that sting a little bit, because it's not only refining to us, but he's using that refining to be able to leverage that in different ways in the days ahead. So, Amanda,
Yes, I love that.
love you so much. I'm so grateful for you. I'm grateful for you kind of tackling a couple of the hard things and being willing to share so vulnerably. So thank you so much. How do people kind of get in touch with you? How do they get, I mean, we didn't even get to touch on your songwriting, which is a beautiful
Yeah.
part of, I think, God's gifting to you. So we'll have to do round two another time. So why don't you tell everybody how they connect with you?
Yeah. So one thing I forgot to say, I have a ministry, a music ministry to women called My Strength and My Song. Comes from Exodus 15. And so a website that we have is mystrengthandmysong.com. You can also find us on socials with that, My Strength and My Song. And we've released, I think I just did the count the other day, over 20 songs that, yeah, our goal is just pointing women to Jesus through music and God's word. And it's just the idea of equipping women with truth, because I think our minds are so quick to spiral. So that's My Strength and My Song. And then you could find me. I have a music page on Instagram at Amanda Chapman Music, and I post some things. My church has released music, Park Springs Worship, and we're actually about to release a Christmas album. So,
Can't wait.
yeah, and it's an exciting project because it's not a typical Christmas album. So, yeah, I would love for anybody to check me out or just even message me. And definitely, if this touched you or if you were left with questions, because sometimes I wonder, if I make sense totally.
Oh, whatever. Well, thank you so much for giving your time and wisdom and story to us today. And as always, we're so thankful that you joined us for this episode, and we will see you next time.